Hello, Geoff, and welcome guests. Geoff,
Good
how are
morning,
you
Mike.
today?
Very, very green, verdant background there behind you.
I know I'm sampling the various environments of British Columbia. It's wonderful, wonderful to get around, see
Yeah,
greenery, and a lot of rain too. I'm seeing in the
yeah. It
last
looks like
24 hours,
looks like
a lot of rain.
incredible.
Um, well, it's spring break in British Columbia. The politicians are nursing their wounds and sharpening their swords while they're on hiatus from the legislature. Um, Have you noticed any flesh wounds, Geoff? Have you from your network? Are they?
I think there's quite a bit of wear and tear, but on the conservative side, I think their attention is elsewhere. We can talk about that later, but I
Oh, we certainly
I
will.
can't imagine that too many of them are focused really hard on the legislature, except the ones who absolutely have to.
Well, in the strategy suite today, we're going to discuss Hoodiegate. We're going to talk about the pothole chasin Poco mayor. I guess he still is. I think he's still the mayor, but we're going to
Yeah,
talk about him. I can't remember if he's moved on to greater glory yet.
no.
We're going to talk about Premier Eby speaking to the NDP assorted throng at the provincial council meeting. We're going to talk about vote counting getting tense on the budget bill. And finally, two would-be conservative contenders are now backing other horses, while one contender is claiming to be the bell cow. But first, our guest. In July 2025, Aaron Pete was elected chief of the Chiwathil First Nation, which is located near Hope, after having previously served as a counselor. He's a lawyer. He's worked as a native court worker. He helping assist Indigenous people navigate through the justice system. And he's a podcaster, leading a podcast called Nuanced, which many of you have probably listened to because his traction in the podcast world is getting bigger and bigger. He has a big following that has included and has had a lot of guests, which have included the premier, opposition leaders, and also a lot of people from various perspectives. Aaron has shown a remarkable range in going to all sides of the spectrum to hear views that he wants to understand better and help his listeners understand better. He's also probed into some sensitive issues like reconciliation, residential school graves, Cowichan ruling, and other topics that show some courage as a podcaster to pursue. Aaron, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Thank you so much for having me. I should note I am not a practicing lawyer. I just have a law degree.
Well, that's even better. Um, you're educated and you're not a lawyer. That's perfect. Ha ha, lawyers. Don't worry, I still love you. Um, well, how did you get into? Let's start with podcasting. Tell us about your podcast and how you got into it.
It's a great question. I grew up with a mother who has fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and she raised me as a single mother. And then I've never met my father. So finding good role models, finding people who were accomplished, who had reached great heights was something that was really of interest of me while I was in law school. And I was just thinking about the voices that I hadn't heard from and wanting to understand how to lead a successful life. So the original name of the podcast was Bigger Than Me, and I was looking for people who had a mindset bigger than themselves, who were working to make a difference in their communities. And then about a year ago, I changed the name from Bigger Than Me podcast to Nuanced, trying to take on issues and understand things. Some of the guests that I was seeking to have on, I disagreed with them politically, but I was interested in their ideas nonetheless. And so I
Mhm.
thought Nuanced did a better job of covering that. And then I also felt more recently that I was ready to start covering issues in my own way. So the standard kind of approach in the monologues that I do is usually outline the issue, why I think it's relevant today, go through what the source documents are on it, lay out the left leaning perspective, the right leaning perspective, and anywhere in between that's relevant, business perspectives or economic perspectives, and then provide my take as a summary. And so I wanted something that was more enlightening rather than focused on a team sport.
Well, Aaron, in Mike's introduction, he pointed to your willingness to tackle a really wide range of issues. But do you feel you bring an Indigenous perspective to issues, or you're someone who's Indigenous who's bringing their own and broad perspective to these issues?
I guess I would say the latter. I don't view any group as a monolith. Like as I watch what's going on in Iran right now, there's a lot of people saying the protesters are in support of what's going on. And then there's other groups saying, no, that's not, they're not in support. So it's so complicated to try and understand what one perspective would represent a community. It's diverse and people don't agree. I would say that I'm an outlier. Not many Indigenous people are willing to engage on the issues that I'm willing to engage on right now. I'm trying to schedule a debate right now on whether or not reconciliation is even a good that we should be pursuing. And that's neither party seems to want to touch that topic. And I think I have some compelling arguments as to why it's important, but I don't think it's productive to avoid those things. And so I'm doing my best at least to try and chart a path forward for the most vulnerable. That's my perspective on the Indigenous file, is that like my understanding always was that we were trying to make sure that one group wasn't left behind because of the land that they were born onto, the reserve system, how taxes get administered on there, the challenges that can come up with the reserve system. I thought that was the goal of the reconciliation project. Now it's become more about rights and title, and I know some people always felt that way, but my focus will always be on making sure every British Columbian and Canadian has an equal opportunity to reach their goals.
Hmm.
You wrote recently in the Hub that reconciliation needs a finish line. What do you mean by that?
I don't know where we're going on the reconciliation file. I don't know what any party's plan is over the long term. Even if you're a party that says DRIPA needs to end, where are we going? How are we dealing with the reserve system? Are we just going to forget about Indigenous people? And so my position is very plainly Indigenous communities have long stated that our education rates are worse, our addiction rates are worse, that the opportunities are worse on reserve. There's less economic development. There's less job opportunities. There's more social development. There's more crime. There's more sexual abuse. We've all long argued that position, and none of those files have improved drastically over the past 10 years. And there's been millions of dollars invested. And so I would just like to go back to those source stats, agree that that's an issue that every British Columbian would get on board with, demonstrate through research and partnering with the university that this is how we'd like to get out of these circumstances, and then fund the plan to move forward. And if the plan fails, stop funding it, pivot, and find a different approach. But I don't know where we're going. And I agree with many British Columbians that this, and Canadians, that this does need a plan that everybody can get on board with. This cannot go on indefinitely because it's not improving the living circumstances on reserve.
Well, I'd like to bear down a bit more on this because you wear two hats, which is really interesting and I think a valuable opportunity for us. You may not want to answer some of these questions the way I'd like to pose them, but we have a situation now where we have a declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. We have a lot of leading conservatives saying it should be repealed, that it's too broken to maintain in its current form. We have the Premier saying, I'm going to amend the act to resolve some issues I see in there caused by court rulings. And we have the First Nations Leadership Council and a broad range of First Nations organizations saying, do not amend it. So we seem to be in a kind of a several immovable forces and irresistible forces and immovable objects. Can you give us an insight, though, into how um, the political process works on the Indigenous side, as someone who's both a chief of your own people, but also, watching politics closely? I think it's confusing for a lot of non-Indigenous people. There's a First Nations Leadership Council. There's 80 different or 200 different First Nations organizations. How does the First Nations Leadership Council get a mandate to have that conversation? And are they in a position to actually represent Indigenous organizations? And then secondly, there's a statement made that somehow if there's participation by First Nations in decision making, that those First Nations governments are unelected. And somehow, therefore, they're certainly not elected by non-Indigenous people, but my understanding is they're often elected by the communities they represent. So walk through that. How is the Indigenous leadership writ large participating in this debate, or does it have an easy way in?
The first part, I think I'll get to. I think I'll probably ask you to repeat the second part of the question, which I
Yeah,
think is
I'm
more
sorry.
around on
I
how
kind
First
of,
Nations interact with the broader public. The first piece I'll say is that BCAFN, the FNLC, for people who don't know the acronyms, the BC Assembly of First Nations, UBCIC, which is the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and then the FNLC, the First Nations Leadership Council, are all lobbying organizations on behalf of First Nation communities. And they do annual general meetings, they do quarterly meetings with First Nation communities, and they do try and derive a mandate from them. But again, no one organization, in my opinion, could ever represent the diverse views and goals of First Nation. There's 204 First Nation communities. It's as if saying that when the Union of BC Municipalities meets, that they are all one voice at the end of it, right? That couldn't be the case, and it would never be. And I don't think I'm very popular with those organizations right now because I think we need more transparency. From what I've seen of what they're doing publicly, they're calling a lot of people a lot of names right now and accusing people who don't like the Cowichan decision, who don't like the Musqueam decision, racist, or that there's racist undertones driving that. And I just don't agree. I don't think that's productive. I don't think name calling leads towards truth or reconciliation. And I think these issues are complicated and needs to be treated as such. And so they have long been able to do more of the communications on behalf of First Nations. And I think that's a pain point that we're dealing with as we have the Musqueam Agreement come out, and nobody really had a communications plan on how to
Mm-hmm.
communicate it or to be transparent about the agreement themselves. And so I think they've long held a title, and when they've called out government has jumped and said, what do you want us to do about it, and how do we fix our relationship? I don't think that's a productive relationship. And when I've met with senior level officials in government, I've said we need a path forward where First Nations have more of a strong community understanding of how to communicate with the public on these issues, how to partner, how to make sure that we're working together. But I do think that the province and the federal government absolutely need to revamp their communications approach on
Yeah.
this file because it's getting us nowhere. To your second question, just clarify for me, it was more around we're
Well,
elected, but we're not elected by the broader public. We're only elected by our own members. And so how do we work with others if that's our mandate from just
yeah, I
that
think
community?
I'm trying to get at, well, the experience of you as a chief of your own people, and what accent, how you respond to their views, and how you, for example, participate if you are able to in this bigger discussion.
Yeah, I've seen this a lot online, and I'm not saying that every leader is like me, but I just did a meeting with the mayor of the District of Hope, and we've developed a 5-year housing strategy in 2024. We fully implemented it on reserve, and now we're ready to look at a housing strategy off our reserve to support our own members. And so I met with the mayor and team and started talking about how do we address the housing issues within the District of Hope, within our region. Is that reaching out to Build Canada Homes? Is there opportunities to partner on these things to deliver not just for our members, but for their community members as well who might be struggling to find housing as we see the push from Vancouver go outwards. And so the mayor of Hope represents his constituents. I represent mine, but we can work together like any other form of government to address big issues and to bring the results they're looking for and we're looking for. And where we might disagree, we need to discuss with our members and they need to discuss with their citizens on the path forward. And I think that's a key piece. But I only represent the people who voted for me, but I can, of course, live in a province and understand the provincial issues and the municipal issues they're facing and try and work together on addressing them. And I guess I worry that if we don't have faith in our leaders to do that, we're really behind the eight ball and farther behind because I see people saying, "Oh, the chief of Musqueam, he only speaks for his member." Well, he lives in Vancouver, right? Like he still has interests beyond his reserve boundary. He
Hmm.
wants things to improve within his region. I can only imagine. I've met the man. He's a very thoughtful leader, and he's done his best, I think, to communicate out that he's not a divisive leader.
Yes, Canada has a productivity problem. And no, I'm not calling anyone lazy. The issue isn't effort, it's infrastructure, AI infrastructure specifically. And that's exactly what presenting sponsor Telus is building. Because here's a fact if you didn't know Canada is home to roughly 10% of the world's leading AI researchers. We helped build this technology, and now it's time we put it to work. From 2014 to 2024, Canada's labor productivity stalled dramatically, and the cumulative effect has put us behind our neighbors. In 2024, our GDP per hour worked sat just 60% of the level of the United States. AI is one of the clearest paths to closing that gap. Right now, most Canadian firms haven't fully implemented AI solutions. We're well behind the global average. That gap reflects a big opportunity, particularly in sectors where security is non negotiable, like financial services, energy, and healthcare. A recent PwC Canada report suggests AI could add up to $760 billion to Canada's GDP by 2035. But capturing that opportunity requires the right policy framework. The federal government's Buy Canadian policy is a step in the right direction, but without clear definitions, it falls short. That's why Telus has been advocating for stricter definitions. That Canadian means Canadian headquartered, and sovereign means end-to-end Canadian operational control. Telus' Sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec, is already putting those principles into practice, keeping jobs and economic gains within the Canadian economy. Because as we unlock the potential of AI productivity, we need to make sure it's our own economy and Canadian workers who benefit. That's true sovereignty.
You mentioned, a few minutes ago about improving conditions on reserve. And where do off reserve members fit in that analysis? I mean, obviously, when you look at urban centers like Vancouver, Surrey, Prince George, Kamloops, there's a real diaspora of First Nation members from all over, from bands all over British Columbia living in certain places, and obviously in the low end of the socioeconomic continuum, if you will. And a lot of the indicators that you mentioned earlier, whether it's addiction or child protection or incarceration, are all, way overrepresented. So how do we connect the off reserve population to the home? Does it need to be connected to the home government? Does leadership back home have a responsibility to the off reserve population they're living in other places?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the favorite questions I've ever been asked. And I'm going to speak really, really fast because there's a lot to cover. And I know we only have a limited amount of time, but it's a question worth asking. So I was a native court worker for about 5 years. And during that time, I saw issues with housing, addiction treatment, resources for people who were struggling to be able to access. And one of the biggest challenges they had is they had to live in Chilliwack or Hope or in municipalities because that's where the housing was available, like Ann Davis or Salvation Army, like resources for them to stay in. And so that was where they had to go. So they had to be in urban populations in order to find any housing. In running for chief and council, I joined on council and we started developing a housing strategy where I realized if we were to increase housing supply on reserve, we would pull people either off the streets or out of urban centers and bring them back home to their community where they know people, where they have connection, where they're able to practice their culture. And so we submitted an application to BC Housing in order to build 31 new units, kind of townhouse style buildings, which will create 103 new beds within our community. And that will result in people coming off the streets, people coming back home from urban centers, and reducing the housing pressure within municipalities across the Lower Mainland. And other communities are doing the same thing. And so I actually think the more First Nations are able to step up and return housing on reserve, the less pressure you'll see on housing resources, on homelessness resources. And I really appreciated that that was John Horgan's approach. He was one of the only leaders, from my understanding, from what I've heard, amongst the NDP who actually saw this. And the only other reason that that's really interesting is because it's the first province ever in Canada to invest in housing on reserve, because they actually have no obligation on reserve. Only the federal government does. And the reason that's interesting is because Indigenous Services Canada and CMHC have always been the housing funders, and they've always underfunded, and they've never had to follow provincial housing code. So all of our housing has always been developed subpar. They give us, say, $80,000 to build a house. Of course, we can't build for that. So we build a rickety old shed for somebody to live in and call that housing on reserve. BC Housing and what John Horgan did during that time, I know that they paused that approach for the time being. I really hope that they reconsider that, because that is a pitch, again, to everyday British Columbians. This is a way to address the housing crisis. This is a way to address the homelessness crisis. If you allow us funding to build in our community, we can bring people home and start offering them the services there. I really appreciate the question, because it's something that I think a lot about, is how do we address some of these issues and how can First Nations get involved?
Take that to healthcare. I mean, that's a second area where we see Indigenous people suffering more from issues of overdose and addiction than the general population. And then the difficulties of delivering services in many remote communities pose all kinds of problems. Is the housing example relevant to the healthcare situation as well? And how do you see that unfolding?
It's an interesting question. I don't mean to disparage FNHA or the goals that they have. They're the first provincial health authority in all of Canada. Everyone else is governed by Indigenous Services Canada for their health dollars. And I'll just be frank, I don't see the same level of improvements on that front because perhaps health is so unique, but also people have to want the services. Like I just see our whole healthcare system. Maybe this doesn't go to the foot of FNHA, but I just see the whole health system failing and buckling under its own weight. And I just see us pouring money on the problems and seeing no improvement. Like I know this budget, I just did a breakdown on the budget. More money is being spent on healthcare than ever before. And our services couldn't be more delayed and more fractured. And we still have all the same problems that this government came in saying they were going to address. And so I think if we were to address the root causes, like I remember growing up going to a satellite clinic for my issues, and I didn't have to go to the ER in order to be seen for an issue. And so I think we need reform on healthcare and a different approach because we're spending a lot of money and not seeing the result. And that could be for a multitude of factors. But I think if we can address it provincially, there will be downstream benefits to First Nation communities.
Aaron, you've spoken about the need for accountability and transparency in First Nations governance. And we had a guest on the show last year, Wamish Hamilton, who's a reporter for CBC, who spoke about this as well, the importance of journalism to drive accountability in among governments. And you mentioned 204 of them in British Columbia. Um, what are your thoughts on how transparency and accountability, how it fits today, where it needs to go? Is it are there deficiencies compared to, say, local governments that need to be addressed in terms of the amount of transparency, or is it just come down to people, right? Does it just come down to uh, leaders being more transparent and accountable in one place compared to the other?
It's a great question. I guess I'll clarify. I believe all governments should be
Yeah,
transparent and accountable to their
yeah.
their citizens or to their membership, with particular consideration for First Nation communities. There's a few gaps that I've gotten to witness. The first I'll say is newsrooms and journalists being afraid to offend. And I think
Mm.
that's rampant across not only British Columbia, but Canada, of disrespecting or undermining or wanting to say the right thing. It's also like I just saw that there was a report of the highest paid chief of this year. Made some ridiculous amount of money and traveled the whole world using his members' dollars. And that's awful and that should not be taking place. But then I was contacted by a journalist saying, hey, we know that not all chiefs are like that. Would you be open to participating in a story about how not all chiefs are like? And I was like, no, because that needs to be called out. And we don't actually need to do a piece counteracting that in order to have some form of balance that makes people feel better. When politicians are being paid too much money, like I called out, there was a bunch of healthcare administrators that were making like $500,000 a year here in BC. There was like five of them. The Fraser Valley Current wrote about it. I called that out. And you don't need a story about how nurses are underpaid in order to call out what's going on over there, right? Like we should be able to just call that out. So first, I know that newsrooms are petrified to go into chief and council meetings, to request documents, to communicate with them out of fear of being disrespectful, not knowing if they have the authority to do so. So that's a major problem. The other piece that I think is worth mentioning is the First Nations Financial Transparency Act. It is implemented in the sense that First Nation communities like ours follow that act, but it's not enforced, which means that if we don't follow it, there's no consequences to us right now. There's no funding
Mhm.
restrictions. I believe that it should be fully enforced. Our community, when I joined, we were 4 years behind on our audits, and we needed to get that addressed. And we didn't have a strong financial department that was making sure that that was being dealt with. We've now addressed that. We're completely up to date. We're budgeting, and all of our information is available online. If people want to go to First Nations Financial Transparency Act, and you can type in Chiwathil, and you'll see all of our finances year over year. And so there is transparency and there are gaps in where journalists I think feel comfortable, and I don't think that's unreasonable, but I think we do need to break that stigma because my members, right, like the community members that live there, are have low education rates, are struggling with addictions, and are on social development. So to expect them to be able to 100% hold me accountable is not fair
Mhm.
to put all that pressure on them. And I think journalists need to feel more comfortable holding us as leaders, as elected officials, accountable for our actions and our decisions, and make sure we're acting in a way that's aligned with not only our community members, but with the public dollar.
You've had a chance to interview the premier and opposition leaders, Leah Warbus, who's the House leader on the Conservative side. Given that vast and pretty deep probe you've done, what stands out for you as realities or new developments in the political scene now?
With the premier and Alia Warbus, I
Well,
guess
just
I'd
generally, I'm
say
just looking for your take on what stands out for you now as important developments in the BC political scene, based on all the chances you've had to talk to leaders there.
as I mentioned, I just did this breakdown on the budget, and I think David Eby's leadership style is probably one thing that's standing out to me most. I was really
Mm.
interested in the dynamic between why does this comparison of John Horgan and him keep coming up? And so I did a breakdown on it and just understanding that he's much more managerial and there's no vision, there's no layout of where are we going, where are we going to be as British Columbians in 10 years. That I don't feel like is being communicated out to anybody. And I would say the same of the Conservatives. There's lots of things they want to not do. And undo. And I know I've looked at their platform. I know there's things that they do want to accomplish, but I don't feel like as a province right now we have a clear direction. Where do we want to go, and how are we going to get there? Even if we just want to zoom out and we want a thriving economy, okay, what sectors can we agree that that's going to be in? Like I just don't feel like there's any cohesion on a lot of these issues, and maybe it was always that way. I'm only 30 years old. I've only been following this for about 10 years now, but it just feels like we can't get on the same page about, do we expand mining, do we minimize mining, are we going to try and expand our forestry sector, are we going to build a pipeline, are we not going to build a pipeline? Like I just don't know what the plan is and where we're going. And I think that's my biggest concern right now, because that's what creates division, is then we start fighting over the micro issues because there's nothing else to ground us in the conversation where we can all agree as British Columbians we want to do something. And I don't even know what
Mhm.
those things are right now. And I think that's what surprises me most is with my community every day, I'm trying to get an understanding of what do they want from me? How do I do a good job by their definition? And the great thing I'll say about like my position is I don't live on reserve, and I've never lived on reserve. So I have no vested interest in I want this to be built there and I need this to be painted that color and I need this road named after me. Like I don't care. It's whatever you guys tell me you want is what I'm going to go deliver on. And that's just very freeing. And I just don't have a clear sense. And so the other piece that I wrote about was Alberta is doing the Alberta Next, or they did the Alberta Next tour where they were getting town halls and they were getting feedback. We need that in BC. We need every province and every municipality to be asking and seeking feedback and guidance on what are the policy objectives that we're working towards. What does it mean to be a British Columbian, and how do we execute that in a way that everybody can be excited about and get on board with?
With spring right around the corner, our sponsor Fortis BC wants to make sure you're ready for yard work. Public safety is the number one priority for our sponsor Fortis BC, and raising awareness of the importance of safe digging is one of the ways they keep their customers safe and minimize potential service disruptions. That means clicking or calling BC One Call before digging or any other active ground disturbance, even for something as simple as planting shrubs, gardening, or building a fence. BC One Call is a free service that provides location details of utility lines in the area an individual is looking to work in, ultimately reducing the risk of accidental damage. Approximately 90% of damages to Fortis BC's gas lines are preventable when BC One Call is contacted in advance and the required safe digging practices are followed. Residents and contractors can contact BC One Call by visiting their website www.bc1c.ca, that's BC the number 1 c.ca, or calling 1-800-474-6886. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. I'm not sure if she's your MLA, but Elia Warbus is out in Chilliwack area, near where you represent, and you've had her on your podcast. I mean, we've had her on our podcast too. it's one of the few Indigenous MLAs in the BC legislature and the only one in the BC Conservative caucus. She's in an interesting place, and as House Leader has a position of responsibility in her caucus as well. So, how are you sizing up? Um, how her career trajectory is going in her first term, and is she someone that First Nations members are looking up to, or see something in her that, um, given her unique position, that whether they like it or not, is she making a difference with First Nation members?
That's a really interesting question. I guess I'll say from the outset, it's really interesting to me because there are a few First Nations that are willing to engage in the political scene and try and take these issues on. Hal Salem is another one. And
Hmm.
we take all of the flack for issues that we're not even trying to carry water for.
Hmm.
And so I find that really interesting. I did see on Facebook that there was a whole thing going around on like First Nation, there's a bunch of like First Nation group pages, and there was a bunch of smear campaigns going on about Alia and that she is like an apple, that she's red on the outside and white on the inside. And I've gotten that same critique. And I think you have to commend people who are willing to try and stand on principle on things and trying to chart a path forward. Because she's the only one, she's going to catch way more flack from both sides. Conservatives who say, let's give up on reconciliation. Like, I don't know behind the scenes how much those DRIPA conversations weigh on her because, as you mentioned from the outset, like conservatives are worried about DRIPA. Okay, tell me the section that they're worried about because I'm hearing it as a monolith of a whole like act. And it's like, okay, conservatives are worried about the Motor Vehicle Act. Well, we should probably agree on what section we're concerned with, or at least be able to defend it. And I've invited many of the conservative leaders, or would-be leaders, the people interested, I'm not hearing anything. I've offered to debate them. Like, I don't even care about DRIPA. I've made that pretty clear. I'm not invested in that's the policy solution to all our problems. But you have to lay out to me what you think that act is doing, because it did not create the Cowichan decision. It did not create the Musqueam agreement. It did not create the 215 graves story. It did none of those things. And so it may have played a piece of a pie, but I sincerely, with all due respect, worry that if conservatives bet everything on that and tell the British Columbians this is the solution to all your problems, and then they do, and it doesn't fix all of the problems, that they're in for a lot of angry constituents who thought that that was the solution. And so Ali is behind the scenes, I'm sure, trying to navigate the path forward. And it's a lot of pressure on one person. And I commend her for being willing to do that. And I do think it's opening First Nation communities' eyes to you don't need to default to NDP liberal support because they're the ones who are nice to you. Like I think there is this unhealthy, like I've spoken to many conservatives and all of them want the poverty and the abuse on reserve and the crime on reserve to stop. All of them want, we can all agree on certain pieces. It's just how we
Hmm.
go about doing that. And so I do think at times conservatives are overly described as being bigots or hateful, or there's an ulterior motive to ruin First Nations people. I think that's really unhealthy and unproductive. And so I commend Ali. I commend anyone who's willing to break from the groupthink and try and understand the issues on their own merits and be independent in that way. And I think she's gotten flack from both sides, and her willingness to continue on that, I think, is something you have to respect, even if you don't agree with her.
Well, I give you a lot of credit, Aaron, because at the beginning of one of the recent podcasts I took a look at, you apologized for some eye rolls and some emojis you put on when you would, in retrospect, have preferred to be more, I think you put it as
Yeah.
respectful in your interactions. But are there views out there that persist that sort of just drive you nuts without being disparaging of the people who hold those views? Are there times when you think, can we just get past that and have a deeper discussion? And what are those moments?
I don't think there are views that I think do that, but I do worry that there's just such a cachet with so many. I don't want to call them influencers because that's often like a disparaging term, but there are people who will grab a snippet of a news article and do a whole breakdown on it without actually engaging on the issue. And that's why I
Hmm.
like doing an hour breakdown on something is I want to at least give you a fuller understanding. So even if you don't agree with my take at the end, you actually understand what's going on. And I just see people they call it like rage baiting and stuff like that. I just see a lot of that, particularly like
Hmm.
everybody did that in response to the Musqueam agreement. The Musqueam agreement doesn't even confirm any agreements on land. Now, I have a lot of concerns about how the agreement was approached and all of those things, but it didn't do what a lot of people claimed it did. Just like the Cowichan decision, a lot of people said, "I've just lost my house." Like they posted about that. Like they that didn't happen, and this is just madness. And so I worry more about that. I don't think like I'm going to try and have some people on that I actually think both the Conservatives and the NDP would say you should not even speak to those people. Because I don't believe that it's productive to say this person isn't allowed to be a part of the public square because that creates more division. And there's people who agree with individuals like Dallas Brody and Tara
Hmm.
Armstrong. I can really disagree with them on so many pieces. Like Tara Armstrong wrote a post like about the Musqueam agreement that this is now going to mean that like First Nations reserves and like the quality of living on reserve is going to leak into Vancouver. I mean, like the downtown east side A already exists. And B, what a horrible thing to say. Like part of the reason that that's like that is because First Nations have not been able to tax their community because they're in poverty and they rely on government funding that hasn't been there for like 100 years in order for them to fix these issues. It's not their preference for the community to live in this type of poverty, and to make it sound like we're just going to leak that out is just awful. And third, it's not even like every community is like that. And so I can really like disagree with that issue. But Tara Armstrong's still a person. She's still a human being. She still has family. I'm not going to write her off. She's a representative of her community right now, and you have to give her that respect in that vein. And then I can disagree with her on the issues that we're discussing. And I think we need to get back to that as British Columbians. There's been a lot of talk about the rise of polarization. But how do we get out of that? I think it's through conversations with people we disagree
Hmm.
with. And I think, to be honest with you, the left has gotten very lazy. And I would put myself right now as more left leaning in certain regards and right leaning on certain regards. That we've gotten really bad on the left at being willing to engage with people we disagree with and taking on the merits of their argument rather than just calling them racist, bigots, evil people who want the worst for everybody.
Hmm.
Well, it
Yeah, I would
seems
agree.
like there's been a lot of polarization just within 5 years, if I can use that time frame, because I think at the moment that the uh, the grave sites that were you know uh, found in the radar images or the lidar, whatever it was, in Kamloops, and that set off basically an explosion of reaction nationwide, leading to flags at half-mast and a real movement was on one end of things, and now post Cowichan ruling, we're seeing an emboldening of commentary from the Dallas Brodies, Tara Armstrongs, and that side of things. And it seems like those are two very different moments in time, representing two very different approaches. And you know, uh, two things can be right at the same time as well. Like it's not that everyone's right or wrong. It's that there's these issues are super complicated and there's a lot of emotion tied up with them. And I'm just wondering if you personally feel the pendulum shifts, and do they impact you as a leader? And you know, how would you think we can get this debate to equilibrium at some point, or this everyone settles down and has a positive approach?
It's a great point that both of those are kind of two catalysts for a lot of emotion. And I guess I would just go like, what is at the root of both of them? And the root of both of them is one, when the 215 anomalies were reported on, they didn't have the evidence to support the claim that they were making that they were graves. And so they did correct like a month and a half later to anomalies. And so
Yeah.
the root of that is they did not have the evidence for the claim they were making. Now you look at the Cowichan decision, they don't have the evidence, like I would say the right doesn't have the evidence for the claim that people are losing their private property rights. That has not happened yet. There is no evidence that that's going to happen. No political party, as Hal Salem pointed out, is running on the idea that we're going to start to reduce your private property rights. It would not surprise me if we still see a bill in the coming months that says private property rights are off the table in British Columbia and they are safeguarded forever. Like I could just
Hmm.
see that being a bill that the NDP and the Conservatives could both get on board with. And so there's that piece of, and then I agree with you. I think the failure of Indigenous people at large is that they are not reading the room right now. Like if we look at them as a monolith, I just don't think many of them are realizing that there's like a spectrum of people. Of course, you've got those well-meaning left-leaning people who will support Indigenous issues until the end of time. They don't need any more convincing. They don't need any more information. They're good to go. Then you have the middle grounded people who are like, I can't put food in my fridge, and we're giving you money. Like, I need money. I don't have the money to be giving you through tax dollars, and I'm a little bit nervous about whether or not that's sustainable over the long term, and when is the end date. And then you have the right leaning people who are like, this is just not necessary. We don't have blood guilt. I'm not responsible for my ancestors. I'm not responsible for Indian residential schools, and I'd like to move on. Now that spectrum, that's got to be 50-40% of people are in this spectrum of like, I don't know, maybe, probably not. Our finances at the budget of 2026 is not looking good. We have no plan to get back to a balanced budget. Like, it's not unreasonable for people to say that this is not sustainable and we need a path forward. And so we have seen government start to cut and go, we cannot continue this. As I mentioned, BC Housing is not, it has paused their Indigenous intake for building homes on reserve. They've paused the $10 a day daycare. Both of those, I would say, are important for people on fixed incomes and Indigenous communities. And so we are seeing that pullback. But what's the solution? It's not for me to go to David Eby and call him an evil monster that doesn't care about me anymore. It's to say, you're hurting. Your citizens are in a tough financial circumstance. Our province is in a tough financial circumstance. How do I work with you to grow our economy in a good way? How do I meet you where you're at while still trying to protect the environment? And how do we chart a path forward as partners? If First Nations want to be sovereign, self-governing organizations, then we have to be able to meet with the municipalities, the province, and the federal government and go, we see the challenges you're facing as a government, and we need to work with you on those issues as well. That means being open-minded to a pipeline, or at least laying out what the criteria you would have in order to say yes. And if that's nothing, then that needs to be communicated from the outset. And we need to start showing up and owning those decisions and saying, we're here as a government. This is a government to government relationship. And that doesn't mean that I just hold out my hands whenever I want something and then walk away whenever you're in trouble. That means working together through all of these issues, and trying to show up where we can.
Well, thanks very much, Aaron. I don't know what we could add to that. Very interesting a summary, and I think you're going to find a lot of people nodding their heads in response to those kinds of comments, because it's very, very difficult to break down the paranoia, as you say, when people start posting, I'm going to lose my house, and where do you begin to unravel something like that? So thanks for being prepared to take on those tough issues and to hear views that you may not really embrace right off the bat, but want to understand better.
Thank you for having me, guys. Great questions.
And Aaron, let's hear your plug for your podcast. Let people know where they can how they can tune in.
Absolutely. So it's Nuanced, Nuanced. You can find it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Have some pretty big interviews, I think, coming up. I'm pretty excited about. Just did one on the 2026 budget, interviewed the leader of the BC Green Party, and it's something I do out of passion. I make no money from it. I don't have any sponsors. I don't have any government funding or anything like that. I'm just completely independent. So again, appreciate you guys. These were really thoughtful questions, and I hope they help people grapple with these issues in a more thoughtful way.
Well, thanks for your contribution to civil discourse and broadening people's perspectives. And we look forward to having you on Hotel Pacifico again sometime soon.
When wild salmon return, coastal communities and economies thrive. By transitioning away from Pacific ocean-based salmon farms, we can rebuild salmon runs and restore the health of our waters, reviving ecosystems that coastal communities rely on, bringing back tourism, expanding local business, and generating thousands of good year-round jobs across coastal regions. And we can create new opportunities with future-focused industries like modernized land-based aquaculture that protects wild salmon, strengthens food security, and supports workers and families. That's according to our new sponsor, Wild First. For them, it's essential nation-building work, built in partnership with First Nations, that will unlock long-term economic opportunity and attract global investment to Canada's coastal industries. Let's secure a strong, sustainable coastal economy for generations with the wild salmon economy. Wild First. let opportunity flow. Visit wildfirst.ca.
Okay, Geoff, we're back in the strategy suite. As we said at the top, it's spring break. Legislature is on hiatus. The politicians are out watching the daffodils bloom. And
Staggered home for spring break after arduous, what was it, 4 weeks in the house?
I think so. Oh boy, 4 weeks working. That's they need a break. No,
Well, we
we're
laugh,
getting.
but you have to admit that by the end of each of these bouts, people are really a wreck. I don't know what your experience was, but the last week before a break, and people are
Yeah,
tired and
they're
they've been
punchy.
under the whip, anything can happen. Yeah.
Well, they're arguably getting a little bit punchy and getting under their each other's nerves a little bit. And Premier Eby took umbrage with one of the opposition members this week.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise on a point of order. The member for Kelowna Mission, his conduct yesterday was sexist and inappropriate, and now he shows up today dressed as if the vote interrupted his trip to the gym. You issued a reminder to all members to dress in contemporary business attire. The member has disrespected this House now 2 days in a row, and I ask that you issue a direction to the member.
So that was a clip of Premier David Eby taking issue with Conservative member Gavin Dew about his wardrobe choices, among other things. Um, Gavin had committed the sin of wearing a hoodie to a vote, not in the legislature, though. He was on Zoom. So it's a dangerous precedent, Geoff, that we start enforcing a dress code on Zoom.
Well, oh, he was on
What
Zoom.
will
I
that
missed
mean
that
for
part.
everybody? I think he was
Well,
on
I
Zoom,
thought
yeah.
I wondered if it was a Hugo Boss hoodie or something very high end. I wasn't sure, but I'll just lay my view on the line. I think business attire is a good thing to have in the legislature. It's serious business. So, um, I think that these dress codes are there for a reason, and so I'm fine on that front.
Hey, Geoff, they
But
might not
now,
be wearing pants, like on Zoom. You're like, you don't
yeah,
know. You don't know.
note
So
to
you're
listeners,
just about
note
a
to
top
listeners,
hat.
I'm fully dressed and I have a sports jacket on, and it's only a podcast. But podcast hoodies, I could put my baseball cap on backwards, any number of things. But in the legislature, yeah. But
Well,
I had missed the detail, which is a significant one about Zoom, because it's easy for people to realize that they've been watching with the screen with the camera off, and they got to put it on to vote, and maybe that's where he got
no.
caught
Now,
out.
Gavin's full-throated response on this that I read on Castanet was that he was had been encountering a lot of travel logistical problems. He was rushing around from meeting to meeting, and that he was just made it in time for the vote, something along those lines. And you know, I think his jab was like the premier might not understand the logistical difficulties being in an interior MLA with all the travel. So, I'm
Really?
urging
Okay.
Gavin to travel in a three-piece suit forevermore, just in the event he faces the situation. Um, but anyways,
Well, it was his second round of controversies, Gavin Dew, in less than a week, because he made comments about environment minister, not environment minister, but Kelly Green, emergency services, I think, um, that were deemed sexist by the NDP front bench and was denounced for that. He said that she was sitting meekly while taking dictation from men in suits, and he was roundly denounced on that front. So the Hoodiegate
yeah.
episode was just round two of a period of controversies for Gavin Dew.
Yeah, we'll assume he is going to be voted one of the least popular conservative MLAs by the NDP caucus. Moving on to
That's a long list of people. I don't know. Maybe.
he's tied for first. Um, Now we have a clipping of the week. Now he's back. I have to put on my glasses for this. Brad West, our pothole chasing mayor of Poco. If you're a pothole in Poco, you better be wearing a disguise because that pothole chasing mayor, he's gonna come and get you. He's
You're
gonna
a dead
come and get
pothole
you.
walking. Dead pothole lying there. Yeah.
He's gonna come and get you. So The mayor has popped up from his pothole this week to write a op-ed in Northern Beat, and I quote the mayor, the good mayor of Port Coquitlam. What I hear most are concerns about material needs and what government is actually delivering. The concerns center on competence and follow through that makes the current skirmishes, my emphasis, Hoodiegate, in the BC legislature all the more embarrassing. You are forgiven if you haven't been glued to the goings-on in the provincial capital, where a succession of bills have recently been introduced designed to achieve little other than allowing MLAs to take over-the-top charges about their political opponents. Dot, dot, dot. That and points of order about attire, language, microaggressions, and other gripes more often heard in the high school hallways. The real goal is a steady stream of clips for social media to keep people outraged and the political donations flowing. But while they argue, the real problems facing our province don't pause. Well, our pothole chasing Mayor Poco is taking issue with the lack of seriousness in the BC legislature. So what about Brad? I mean,
What
he
about
didn't
Brad?
run for the BC Conservative leadership. He's I don't think the job is open in the NDP right now. But
Unless
oh,
Mike Farnworth has different plans. That's right.
well, that's true. But there is a job opening came up today.
Oh, that's right.
Karen Kirkpatrick has announced that she is stepping down from the leadership of Centre BC.
Yeah,
So,
this broke just as we were getting ready to tape. But do we know why?
you know where those potholes are most dangerous in the center of the road.
Driving down the line, always risky. Get hit from either
So,
side.
so we'll see if our pothole chasing Maripoco is is going to take a look at Centre BC or some other vehicle, or he starts maybe putting a big pothole outside of Mark Farnworth's house so he doesn't make it to the legislature next
Well, I think
election.
credit where credit is due. Brad West has got a pretty good ear for what he's hearing on the ground, and Poco is one of
Yeah.
those important suburban ridings where he and has been very forward about keeping everything in good shape. And he's also in a leadership role at is it TransLink or Metro? Both, I guess.
I think he's chair of the mayor's council
Yeah.
for TransLink.
But soon I think it would be good, and I'm not saying this in any snippy way, that for him to speak up about how he would prefer to tackle problems like the huge overrun at the water plant, some of the problems in governance
Yeah.
at Metro. This week, the government or Metro voted to do a review of its governance procedures and how many people are there. I think unless action is taken, the number of people sitting at the Metro table will be 51, which is a pretty large number. So
Yeah.
they have to revise that. And Brad West is someone who could, I think, provide a lot of leadership on these really difficult governance issues in the Lower Mainland. Policing is fragmented, huge overruns on the water plant, the burden of which may fall on people just in North Vancouver. A lot of weird stuff that's hanging over from days gone by that needs to be rectified. And there's not too many incoming premiers who really want to take the bull by the horns and try for a municipal amalgamation or massive overhauls of regional governance. So, Brad, you're a smart guy and you've got your ear to the ground. What solutions do you think should be forthcoming on some of these fronts? We'll
Yeah,
get you on to tell
yeah,
us about it.
go fix the region and kind of then come back to us when you're serious. Maybe
Anyway,
try reverse takeover of the Tri-Cities. There's another project for you. Okay,
no
so
disagreement though about his comments about the legislature. I think everybody would agree with that.
Eric Woodward and Langley's trying to take over the city of Langley. So why doesn't Brad take over Coquitlam? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, just putting it out there. Okay, so you've got some intel, Geoff, about Premier Eby at Provincial Council for the NDP's Provincial Council. What was
Yeah,
happening
last
there?
weekend, provincial council is the top body of the NDP between conventions. And it's a big group. It's scores of people. I can't remember the exact number now, but observers can also attend. And so usually it's a popular destination for a lot of activists in the NDP. Many of them are elected to provincial council. There's a regional component and so on and so forth. The premier usually speaks
Where
or
was it
someone
held?
senior from the front bench. It's usually held in the Lower Mainland, although it can be held elsewhere and
Mhm.
they're open to the media, but the media increasingly don't attend because we have so few media left. But there were some interesting comments at the last one, particularly the desire from the premier's side for the party to get ready for an election at any time, and so he was underlining that. He talked a bit about some of the budget reaction, but also was reminding people about the rather precarious situation that's in place here, where there's a dead heat between the NDP MLAs on one side of the room and all the others, which means that when a confidence matter comes up, Speaker Raj Chauhan is required to cast a tie-breaking vote. So it kind of piqued my curiosity because clearly this is on his mind. No surprise that he would be urging the party to get ready for an election at any time because this has been a fragile situation ever since the last election. But I went back to take a look, and I haven't been able to go back into the last session last fall, but through the votes that have happened so far in this term, and there were some interesting patterns that emerged. I mean, there was one occasion where you would expect the speaker to cast a tiebreaker, which he did on one of the budget votes. So that was, I think, second reading, the critical one, where
Right.
it was all the opposition voting against the government and the speaker then casting a tiebreaker. So there, as we would expect, the Green Party MLAs are now with the Conservatives opposing the budget, whereas in the previous session they would have been supporting the government under CARGA, which stood for that was their confidence and I can't remember the rest
Mhm.
of it, but like a confidence and supply agreement. But there were other votes that were interesting as well because you could see we had a series and we discussed this of debate of high profile votes over whether or not certain private members' bills coming often from one BC and Tara Alexander, who was mentioned by our guest,
Armstrong. Yeah.
yeah, Tara Armstrong, sorry, um, repeal the Human Rights Code or against gender ideology, as she put it. So these are first reading bills where the government side decided, contrary to normal protocol, to vote against them even going to first reading, just throttle them in the cradle, and that happened. And on a couple of occasions, there
Throttle
was
them in the cradle, Geoff.
yeah, right
Wow.
over. It's done, done, done. Subsequently, then they allowed a couple in that were also controversial, I think, but they let them go through. Eleanor Sturko, though, was important to them and those causes. She voted with the government side on a few occasions, and Amelia Boltby on both sides of it. So you can see that there's differences even among the five independents. On a human rights issue, the NDP can pretty well count on Eleanor Sturko. When it's just the budget itself, it seemed to be that she was with the Conservatives. So we can see that you can see why the Premier has some anxiety. I also found one vote on division, which was amendments in a bill about skills and training where the tie was 5-5.
Hmm.
So the speaker, and this is the protocol that he will maintain sort of the status quo. I mean, he's not there to cause instability. He's there to
Well, that
run
would
the
have been the
show.
committee. That would have been in committee.
I guess I didn't go for that deep, but the point there is
Yeah.
that this is, I think everybody's who's been around the legislature knows that a it's hard to keep everybody in the House and keep their attention on bills where basically it's just the opposition going through their list,
Yeah.
but not a bit of an embarrassment and a reminder to everybody how close this can be. This would not have brought down the government because it was not a confidence matter, but we can see as the debates emerge down the road it could be tantamount to a confidence matter or literally one if the government wanted it to be. The Premier also told the provincial council, at which he's told the public repeatedly, that he's going to make amendments to the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So when they get back, I think we'll hear more on that front, and it'll be a very interesting and historic debate.
Hmm. Um, go time on Drippa. Yeah, I wonder what the record is for a government to with a one seat majority, how long a government in Canada has gone with a one seat majority. I can't think of one that's gone full term.
No,
Maybe there has, but maybe one of our listeners will inform us what the precedents are, because it is a long time to sustain if the speaker's breaking the tie every time. Like that's not every time, but when it matters. And that is, yeah, it does feel like this term of office isn't going to make it till 2028 unless there's a floor crossing or something of that nature.
Well, and the government's vulnerable to a mishap if someone is unable to get to the Zoom call even. I mean, it's easier now that it's okay to vote remotely. But if someone falls ill or for whatever other reason doesn't make it, you can wind up in a problem.
Or a tree falls down on a on the telephone line or something, or
Hmm. Yeah,
better have
exactly.
better get your whatever it is, the Skylink.
Your sat
Yeah,
phone
get
ready.
your
Yeah.
sat phone. Okay, well, let's do our check-in on the Conservatives and the
Big
leadership
week, busy
race.
time there.
So we've got a number of would-be leadership candidates uh, have decided to bolt the barn and look for other contenders to back. Harman Bangu has jumped out of the race and has endorsed Caroline Elliott. And we will recall that Harman had said that if Aaron Gunn ran, he would support Aaron, but if Aaron wasn't going to run, he would run. Well, he ran right into the arms of Caroline Elliott. So, and it does seem like there's a ideological fit there. In based on the positions that Caroline's taking, those positions seem to be of comfort to some of the people on who are sympathetic to the views espoused by Aaron Gunn and others. There's others that say no, Caroline's not a true conservative because she was tisk tisk a BC liberal. So there's that narrative out there as well. Then we had Bruce Banman running into the arms of Yuri Fulmer. So I believe that's the first caucus endorsement for Yuri Fulmer, unless I'm mistaken. And Bruce Banman had said he was going to run for leader and is obviously withdrawn. And also Steve Cooner, the member for Richard Zussman's favorite riding of Richmond Queensborough. He is backing Carrie Lynn Finlay.
Hmm.
And Cooner is the Attorney General critic, last time I checked. And Finlay is a lawyer. And for one reason or another, Cooner's decided she's the best candidate to back. I believe there is a 6-minute video you can watch for those interested. I did not make it through the first 5 seconds because I was baking cookies at the time, but I'm sure that that will explain everything. And finally, the bell cow of the bunch, he would say, Peter Millibar, already has some caucus endorsements, but he also has a poll, or at least he's promoting a poll that was released from Main Street that says he's the one who can deliver a majority, not the other guys. So Team Millibar was breathlessly promoting this on social media once the Main Street poll was released. Main Street's behind a paywall, so I haven't really looked at the details on it other than the headline that they do better with Millibar than others. So
But Millibar has the most caucus support at this point.
I think so, yeah.
And given that he and Ian Black and Carolyn Elliott are considered the front runners, I think that the Herman Bangu move to Carolyn Elliott is very helpful to her. Whether there'll be more caucus people who go that way will be very interesting to see.
Well, I think, I mean, I don't have the membership numbers, but one metric I can look at is some can say caucus endorsements is one metric, but another metric is social media. But just looking at Instagram, which is increasingly where people are at these days. Um, Nikki Sharma, Attorney General Nikki Sharma, attacked Caroline Elliott in the legislature for her position to end the Human Rights Tribunal, and Caroline turned it right back to her supporters and said, "I've been attacked, and I'm I'm not changing my position. Here's what I think." That got 80,000 views and 5,800 likes. And other videos Caroline's done have also had lots of traction. Not they go up and down a bit depending on the content. But Caroline is in a class by herself on social media in this leadership campaign. For instance, Kootenai Bill Bennett endorsed Peter Millibar, which is a significant endorsement. Last time I checked, I had about 83 likes. So it's not even in the same
Hmm.
neighborhood. Ian Black's social media is even more anemic than that, and Yuri Fulmer's isn't much better. So um, Carolyn Finley arguably has had some posts that are 500 likes, that type of thing, but no one is anywhere near Caroline. So if you're just looking at that little piece of the race, which is not doesn't explain everything, but on that one area, definitely a position of strength. And the question is, can Caroline Elliott convert, social media following into memberships? And is that also influential on persuading existing members? So that's something I'll be watching.
Yeah. Well, and I think that her Instagram stuff is pretty clever because she will say something that's very high level, like the government is imposing massive fines on people for speaking their minds. Behind the title, which says that, you can see that she's referring to the Neufeld case in Chilliwack, where
Yeah.
a very harsh anti Soji critic was hammered with a $750,000 fine by the Human Rights Tribunal, which is not the government sending out a message to the Human Rights Tribunal. I suspect people were just as shocked in Victoria about the size of that sanction
Mhm.
as anybody else was. But there's a lot of truthiness to what she says, and it's very difficult for the NDP to rebut directly. So I think she's been very effective at channeling this concern that I'm about to lose my house, that I can't speak my mind. It's a list of grievances that she plays out, and they were certainly very comfortable ones, as you say, for Herman Bangu to support.
Well, and I think tactically for the NDP, that for Nikki Sharma, what I take away from that is Nikki Sharma is frustrated with the debate that's happening and was speaking up for her side of the debate in the legislature, but
Hmm.
it was a very much a pedestrian attack that she probably should have just done it. I mean, maybe there's a level of importance that you have when you speak in the legislature, but it certainly didn't go viral. Like it certainly didn't lay a glove on Caroline with those comments. In fact, the opposite is fi helping the conservatives or Caroline in particular fire up her supporters. Now, the danger is that the people getting fired up may cause a problem come the general election time if they're driving them away from the mainstream. But in the context of how you win a leadership race, you need people to follow you and be passionate about you. And to be attacked by the NDP Attorney General and be able to turn it around and say, this is what I stand for, is a bit of a gift.
Yeah, but I think the problem for the NDP remains the same one that was there at the election, which was the interest on the NDP side of attacking conservatives on questions like Soji. There's a whole list of them at that time as well. At human rights, this Neufeld case now is very, very difficult because it's not something that's front of mind for voters. And as we were saying earlier with Brad, referring to Brad West's commentary, what's going on in the legislature is not what is actually preoccupying people. If the government could get on its
Mm.
on a strong message about the economy and the work that's happening on that front, the gains that are being made, the protection of healthcare, the spending that's happening in education, the economic gains that are coming from new investments in mining and so on, then maybe they would be more effective than they are in trying to knock down conservative candidates in an area where the conservatives don't really care. It's a value statement that is polarizing and helping them during a leadership race. And I think they
Yeah.
tried that during the election. It didn't work then. I don't think it's going to work now. But you're right. It is frustrating, and something has to be said about some of it. So
Well, there's a lot of volatility. I mean, the Conservatives are obviously in a strong position in the polls right now, getting stronger. I mean, we've only had a couple polls, but definitely it feels like, things are turning against the NDP a little bit since the budget. Still lots of politics to be played, but also, I do think there's a bit of a yawning chasm in the center, and there's not really any vehicle to take advantage of that. But at this moment, and as much as or at least I was teasing the good mayor of Port Coquitlam on the podcast today, um, what he's saying in that op-ed is something that would resonate with a lot of centrist voters. But there's no way at this point to really monetize that unless people are going to take a chance. People are
mhm.
going to put the work in and take a chance to do it. And so far, I haven't seen any evidence of that. So we have to assume it's a fairly binary choice. whenever we get around to having this election, which
Looks like it.
may well happen sooner than 2028. Well, Geoff, we should probably head to the minibar.
I'm going to raise a glass to Josie Osborne, the health minister, for what I think was unvarnished good news yesterday and today, that about 1,000 American healthcare workers have come to BC and are now working in emergency rooms and hospital wards and you name it, doctors, nurses, and many others, as a result of a campaign that the health ministry launched, and she launched only about a year ago, providing a lot of extra support for many, many, many British Columbians, which is needed. And so that's great to hear finally some very positive and tangible news about increasing the healthcare workforce. The people who were interviewed seem to be leaving because of Trump, at least in part, but they're here and gave every indication of being here to stay. So congratulations to Health Minister Josie Osborne.
Very good, very good. Well, I don't do this very often where I circle back to our guest and you know, use that for the mini bar, but I'm going to raise a glass to Chief Aaron Pete, who joined us earlier today. I find his views very refreshing and courageous, frankly, because he's a young guy who seems to not be, constrained by any form of ideological or partisan, constraints. He's just calling it like he sees it. And combined with the fact he's only 30, I think is really promising to see these types of leaders emerge who potentially can make a important contribution, not just to their First Nation, but I will not be surprised. I don't know if he has any intention of this, but I will not be surprised to see Aaron Pete end up in elected politics someday. He's probably the type of person that should be. Um, so to Aaron and other young leaders, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, who are coming up through the ranks, we need more of you. We need more young people. So good for you.
Yeah, great.
On that note, thanks to Chief Aaron Pete for visiting Hotel Pacifico this week. And thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to bring this episode to you for free. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.